The Westfjords of Iceland. The Westfjords are one of Iceland's most spectacular and awesome regions. The weather can be wild. It's sparsely populated with untouched landscapes and dramatic features unlike any other in this breathtaking country. This is my solo bikepacking adventure in the Westfjords. Thank you very much for watching my bikepacking film. I hope you enjoyed it. This is the part of the video where I run through the route and the behind the scenes so you can learn a bit more about what went on. And also if you want to tackle the route, I'll run through that in a bit more detail. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment and subscribe if you haven't already, because I bring out a bikepacking adventure film just like this every single month. So I've been looking forward to doing this trip for a very long time. This is actually the second time I've been to Iceland, but the first time I just went on holiday with no bike, roughly 12 months prior to this trip. The weather when I went the first time was really sunny and quite warm, and I think maybe that caught me off guard a little bit because it's still spring-like at Iceland at this time of year. Summer really is July and August. I think late May, early June when I went, it's still touch and go whether or not the weather's going to be good. So I flew from Manchester Airport to Reykjavik, and I hired a car from Reykjavik Airport and drove to a tiny village called Stykkishólmur, and that's where you can catch the ferry to the Western Fjords. You can drive to the Western Fjords, but it's another few hours drive, and I just wanted to do something a bit different. I like catching the ferry, which I've done on many different bikepacking trips, which you can see here if you want to check them out. When you rent a car from rental car places, you tend to book like a car tier. So there's compact cars which are usually tiny, like a Toyota Yaris, all the way up to pickup trucks and luxury cars and motorhomes. So because I had the bike box with me, I wanted a car that I knew it would fit in. I always would go for like the next tier from the bottom, so not the compact cars, like the small family car, like a Volkswagen Polo, for example. That would fit perfectly. When I got to my car, it was literally the smallest second tier car you could get. It was a Toyota Aygo X, which I've never even heard of, never seen in the UK before. It was so small, I had to really fight to get the bike box in. I even had to take the boot trim off so that I could squeeze the box in. But thankfully it just fit. The only problem was I couldn't push the seat far enough back, so my knees were up, basically touching my chin for the whole drive, which wasn't ideal. But I was not in the mood to go back and try and negotiate another car. I just wanted to get going and enjoy my trip. There's free parking at Stykkishólmur, and it's pretty cheap to get the ferry as well. So if you're wanting a different experience, I'd definitely recommend doing it. It's so easy to manage, and the great thing obviously at the other end is you don't have to faff with the car. You're already on your bike and you can just set straight off. The ferry goes from Stykkishólmur across to the Western Fjords, and it actually stops briefly at a tiny little island called Flatey or Flatty, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It's the smallest inhabited island on Iceland. I'm not sure how many people live there, but it's a handful. It's quite a touristy destination. People come and stay in the hotel there. There's not much else there, and then they go back on their way. But it's somewhere that I'd like to visit, to be honest. Very, very tiny island, but I just didn't have the time with the trip that I had. So day one, I cycled from Brjanslaekur, which is where the ferry ends, the other side, to a campsite called Melanes campsite. My plan was to stay in a camping pod, which I did, which was reasonably affordable, which just meant the first night I didn't have to set up camp, and thank God I didn't. I kid you not, towards the end of that ride, I experienced the worst weather I've ever experienced in my life. Not just on the bike, but in general. The weather started out okay, it was wet the whole day, but as the day progressed, the winds just got stronger and stronger, to the point where there was sideways rain hitting me in the face, and it honestly felt like people were flicking me really hard in the face or throwing sharp stones. It was really painful, and the wind was so strong that going up these steep gravel paths to the campsite, I couldn't even push the pedals. I tried walking with the bike at times, and it wasn't that steep, by the way, it was probably like 7 or 8%. But the wind was so strong that it was blowing me even when I was walking. I could hardly walk with the bike. Several times I got blown nearly off the road. So I was pretty scared, to be honest, and I was so soaked and so cold towards the end that I genuinely thought I was going to get hypothermia, and that was going to be the end for me. There was no cars on this fantastic gravel road to Melanes campsite, so I did start to panic a little bit. However, by some miracle, a large van appeared over the horizon, and it was an Icelandic chap who could tell I was really struggling. I mean, it's pretty obvious the way that I could hardly carry the bike, but he really kindly offered me a lift for the last 5 miles, which I was so grateful for. He spoke good English, and turns out he'd done a bit of backpacking across the UK, which was quite cool. And he even waited until I got into the camping hut just to make sure that I was all right. He was obviously a bit concerned. Melanes campsite was fantastic. Under good weather circumstances, a great place to pitch up a tent. But I was staying in the camping pod, which I was very thankful of with that storm. It had heating, it had electricity, so I could charge my camera stuff, get my clothes dry. It had a kitchen as well, so if you're wanting to take some food that you actually need to prepare properly and cook, you've got everything you need at that campsite, and it's pretty reasonable as well. They also have a tiny campsite shop, which was also fantastic. It meant that I could stock up on extra food. I'd burnt a lot more calories the day before than I thought I would have done, so I'd eaten quite a lot of the food I brought with me. This campsite is right on the edge of a fjord and a beach, and the beach itself translates to Red Sands Beach because on certain lights the sand actually looks vivid red. I got a little bit of that as I was getting up the fjord, but it wasn't as vivid red as I could have possibly had. But it was still an absolutely stunning place to stop. The plan for day 2 was to cycle across another couple of challenging fjords and then camp by a public swimming pool. Now this is not your typical public swimming pool, it's a hot water swimming pool that was pumped from the hot springs, and there's loads of these across Iceland. Now it's in the middle of nowhere and it looked pretty campable to me. It even had some changing rooms, it was free to use. I thought this would be a perfect place to stop. Now that was the original plan. The climb up from Melanes campsite is really brutal. It's an all gravel road, but it is absolutely stunning. It's not crazy steep, it's sort of 9-10% in places, but with all your gear on, it can be quite a slog. Fantastic scenery, amazing location, and hardly anybody around, so I really enjoyed that climb. Coming down it the day before would have been an absolute nightmare with that wind, so it's just something to bear in mind. There's no barriers or anything to keep you from blowing off the road, so thank God for that chap who put me in the van and could take me to the campsite the day before. Now, because the weather was so appalling on day one, I was genuinely worried about camping, which was what I was planning on doing. I had all my camping equipment, the tent, the sleeping bag, sleeping mat and everything to keep me warm, but because the winds were so strong, I just genuinely thought I'm not going to be able to pitch this tent. If it blows away, I've had it. So instead, I chickened out and decided to book myself in at a hotel in Patreksfjörður, which is a lovely little village. For day 3, I cycled from Patreksfjörður, where I stayed in the hotel, along the coast, over one of the fjord mountains, back to the beach, pretty much where I started on day 1. It's quite a long slog by the beach, and it is incredibly beautiful. There's a lot of farmland, a lot of Icelandic sheep that I tried to get some footage of, but they're so skittish, by the time you set up the camera, they've long gone. Beautiful part of the world, and it's so much better when you're not getting blasted with a howling gale and rain. As I made it back to the ferry, the sun decided to come out finally, and it was absolutely breathtaking. All the grass lit up in like an emerald green glow, and some of the clouds that were rolling off the mountains kind of went back a little bit, retreated, and it just gave you this incredible vista. So I would have liked weather like that every day, but this is the Arctic Circle we're talking about pretty much, so you can't guarantee anything like that. All in all, it was an absolutely amazing adventure. Stunning scenery, it had some real challenges in there, different terrain, smooth roads, rough gravel, and it had a bit of everything really. My only qualm was I would like to go back and do a longer trip at different parts of the island, but I'm just limited with days that I can get off, unfortunately. So I hope you enjoyed that film. Any questions, put them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one.